At 30,000 feet, the oxygen masks dropped. Every passenger grabbed their mask and froze. Every passenger except one. The girl in seat 4D did not reach up. She unbuckled her seatbelt, stood up, walked forward, picked up the radio, and said two words that saved 214 lives. Call sign Phoenix. The flight was supposed to be simple. Gate 14, Terminal B, departure at 6:45 in the morning. Most passengers were still half asleep when they shuffled down the jetway, carrying their coffee cups and rolling their carry-on bags behind them. A woman in a yellow cardigan was arguing quietly with her husband about whether they had checked the stove. A teenage boy had his headphones on before he even reached the door of the aircraft. Nobody was expecting anything. Nobody ever does, on the mornings that change everything. Flight AR-509 was a Boeing 777-200ER, operated by Atlas Regional Airways, route from Chicago O'Hare to London Heathrow. It was a long-haul red-eye, the kind of flight where business travelers take their sleeping pills before takeoff and wake up somewhere over the Atlantic with their neck pillows crooked and their mouths dry. The aircraft had been in service for 11 years, had logged over 29,000 flight hours, and had passed its most recent full maintenance inspection 17 days prior. On paper, it was a routine flight. The crew had flown this route 41 times between them. The aircraft had made this exact crossing 217 times before. There were 214 passengers on board that morning. 213 of them had no idea what was about to happen. The one who did, the one who would change the outcome of everything, was sitting in seat 4D, near the front of economy class, just behind the business cabin divider. She had a window seat, a black duffel bag under the seat in front of her, and a paper cup of black coffee cooling on her tray table. Her name was not on any official record that would matter that morning. Her boarding pass said Maya Reyes. Her call sign was Phoenix. She was 29 years old. Maya had not slept the night before. Not because she was nervous about flying, she had been on more aircraft than most people had been on buses, but because the case she was working would not leave her head. She was officially listed as a civilian logistics consultant, which was technically true in the way that a scalpel is technically a knife. She had spent 6 years working with a government-linked aviation safety firm whose name did not appear on any public registry and whose offices were listed under a holding company with an address in Virginia that nobody had ever visited. The job required her to know more about aircraft systems than most airline pilots, more about maintenance procedures than most engineers, and more about the gap between the two than almost anyone. She could read a fault code off a maintenance log the way a musician reads sheet music, fast, automatic, and without needing to think about what each symbol meant. It was simply there, translating itself. She had taken this flight because it was the fastest connection available. She was supposed to be in London by Monday morning for a debrief on a fuel systems case she had spent 3 months investigating, a case involving a pattern of pressure valve irregularities across 6 aircraft operated by 2 different regional carriers that shared a maintenance contractor. The connection between the 2 carriers was not obvious. Maya had found it in a spreadsheet at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in September, and she had not slept a full night since. She was not supposed to become the most important person on the plane. But that is how these things work. At 7:18 a.m., the aircraft leveled off at cruising altitude of 31,000 feet. The fasten seatbelt sign went off with a soft chime. The cabin crew began their drink service, pushing the heavy carts down the narrow aisles with the practiced efficiency of people who have done this 10,000 times. Maya opened her notebook, a small black one, the pages covered in her own dense handwriting, and started going through her case notes, the pages dense with diagrams and numbers written in a hand so small and precise it looked like printer text. 31 minutes later, she felt it. It was not a sound. That is the thing people do not understand about how Maya perceived the world. She had been born with what her childhood doctors had called hyperacusis, an extreme sensitivity to acoustic frequency that made ordinary sounds feel sharp and physical in a way most people never experience. As she grew older and her training refined it, this sensitivity had developed into something more specific. Sounds that fell below the threshold of normal human hearing registered to her not as sound at all but as a kind of pressure, a physical sensation distributed across her skin and through her chest cavity like a very low and very quiet hum that had weight to it. Infrasound, acoustic frequencies below 20 Hz, below what the human ear can officially detect, is present everywhere. Machinery produces it. Wind produces it. Large structures produce it when they flex under stress. Most people walk through infrasound their entire lives and never notice it, the way fish do not notice water. But trained professionals with a specific auditory sensitivity profile, confirmed in a study published in 2019 by Dr. Marcus Bell at the MIT Lincoln Laboratory, could develop what the researchers called subconscious infrasonic awareness, a capacity to detect and, with training, interpret infrasound signatures the way a ship's sonar operator interprets echoes. The study had 17 subjects. Maya had been one of them. She had scored in the 98th percentile. To put it plainly, Maya could feel things vibrating before she could hear them, and she had spent 6 years learning what different vibrations meant. At 7:49 a.m. and approximately 14 seconds, she felt the aircraft change. It was not a dramatic lurch or a loud bang. There was no shudder, no turbulence, nothing that would have made any other passenger look up from their book or their screen. It was a subtle shift in the oscillation pattern of the fuselage, a change in the rhythm of the background vibration that had been constant and even since takeoff. The aircraft's standard infrasonic signature was something Maya had mapped in her head within the first 20 minutes of flight, the engines at a particular frequency, the airflow over the fuselage at another, the pressurization system at a third, all of them weaving together into a pattern as familiar to her as a voice. At 7:49 a.m. and 14 seconds, one thread of that pattern changed. To anyone else on board, the plane felt completely normal. The man next to her in seat 4E was watching a film on his tablet, his noise-canceling headphones sealed against the world. The woman across the aisle had her blanket pulled up to her chin. To Maya, something had moved that should not have moved, and it had moved in a way that suggested not a mechanical fault in the engines or the electronics but a structural one, a physical component of the airframe behaving differently under load than it had been 1 second before. She closed her notebook. She put her pen down. She looked at the cabin ceiling for 3 seconds, perfectly still, the way an animal goes still when it hears something in the dark. Then she unbuckled her seatbelt. She moved quietly, the way people move when they are trying not to alarm anyone. She walked the few steps forward to the galley at the front of economy class, where a flight attendant named Claire was stacking small orange juice cartons into a service cart. Claire looked up with a practiced smile that softened slightly when she saw the expression on the face of the woman in front of her. It was not panic. It was something more unsettling than panic. It was certainty. "Can I help you?" Claire said. "I need to use the forward lavatory," Maya said, which was not true. But the forward lavatory was adjacent to the galley, and the galley was positioned close enough to the cockpit door that a person standing in exactly the right spot, with the right kind of awareness, could feel through the metal floor the low-frequency vibration patterns originating from the forward pressure bulkhead. Maya stood in the galley for 40 seconds, her left foot pressed almost imperceptibly against the floor panel near the base of the galley counter. Claire watched her with a cautious curiosity she could not quite name. To an outside observer, Maya looked like someone waiting for the lavatory. To someone paying close attention, she looked like someone listening to the floor. What Maya felt in those 40 seconds confirmed what she had suspected from her seat. The vibration was asymmetrical. The pressure equalization cycle in the forward section of the aircraft was running at a frequency that did not match the rest of the airframe. The mismatch was small, smaller than anything a sensor would flag at this stage, smaller than anything a human being without her specific sensitivity would notice, but it was there, and it had a shape to it that she recognized. Something in the door seal system was not cycling correctly. Maya had read the Atlas Regional Maintenance Bulletins for the 777-200ER series approximately 3 months earlier, as background research for the fuel systems case she was currently working. She had not needed to read them. She had read them because she read everything, the way some people read every sign they pass on a highway without intending to. She remembered them the same way, not as effort, but as residue. One bulletin had stayed with her. Number ARB 7734. It had flagged a potential calibration issue with the door seal pressure sensors in aircraft from this series that had undergone a specific type of structural overhaul between 2018 and 2021. The calibration error was described as affecting torque wrench settings applied during door hinge reassembly, with documented variance of up to 14% from the manufacturer's specification. At the time she had read it, Maya had noted it as a low-probability risk item and moved on. At 7:49 a.m. and 14 seconds, at 31,000 feet above the North Atlantic, it had just become the only thing that mattered. At cruise altitude, the differential pressure between the inside of the cabin and the outside atmosphere is approximately 8.6 pounds per square inch. Across the full surface area of a main cabin door on a 777-200ER, that translates to approximately 24,000 pounds of continuous outward force, the equivalent weight of a fully loaded cement truck pushing against that door, every second, without stopping. Under normal conditions, the door seal and hinge assembly absorb and distribute that force safely across redundant load paths. Under conditions where the torque calibration is 14% below specification, those load paths are compromised. Not immediately. Not visibly. But progressively, over hours of continuous pressure, the failure propagates. Maya had 60 seconds to decide what to do before the decision would make itself. At 7:51 a.m. and 22 seconds, the oxygen masks dropped. They came down all at once from every overhead panel in the cabin simultaneously, the little yellow cups swinging on their thin clear plastic tubes, and for 3 full seconds after they appeared the entire cabin was completely, totally silent. That is what survivors always describe first, in every incident report, every interview, every account filed with investigators. The silence. The moment before anyone understood what they were seeing. Then a child in row 19 started crying, and then the silence was gone and the cabin filled with a sound that was not quite screaming but was very close to it, a collective inhale of shock that became voices, became movement, became hands reaching up and faces turning and a flight attendant's trained voice cutting through the noise from the rear of the cabin with words that sounded calm because they had been practiced 10,000 times. Remain calm. Put on your mask first, then assist others. Breathe normally. The aircraft had not dropped. The engines had not changed pitch. The lights were still on. The seatbelt sign was now illuminated again, and the PA was activating, and everything was happening at once, but the plane was still flying and the sky outside the windows was still the same pale gray blue it had been 1 minute ago. Maya did not reach for her mask. She was already at the front of the galley, and she was looking at Claire, who was looking back at her with her own mask half raised to her face and her eyes very wide. Behind Maya, the cabin noise was rising. "I need you to use the interphone and knock on that door," Maya said, pointing at the cockpit door 3 feet away. "Right now. Tell them a passenger needs to speak with the captain on an urgent technical matter. Use those exact words. I'm not supposed to, the protocol during a pressure event is." "I know the protocol," Maya said. Her voice was completely level. There was no shake in it, no urgency that could be mistaken for hysteria. It was the voice of someone who knew exactly what she was saying and exactly why. "I know what caused this. Knock on the door." Claire hesitated for exactly 1 second. In that second, something she could not quite identify, not the urgency in the passenger's voice, but the absence of panic in it, the precision of it, the fact that this woman was standing without a mask in a pressure emergency and looking at her as if they had all the time in the world, made Claire press the interphone button beside the cockpit door. The cockpit of Flight AR-509 had 2 pilots. Captain David Harmon, 53 years old, 31,000 flight hours, ex-Air Force KC-135 tanker pilot who had flown in conditions that commercial aviation categorized as unsurvivable and had come home anyway. He was the kind of pilot who had seen enough things in his career that very few new things could genuinely surprise him. First Officer Kenji Watanabe, 38 years old, 14,000 hours, technically excellent, trained by the book and trusted to deviate from it when necessary. When the pressure warning sounded at 7:51 a.m., both of them had moved through the emergency checklist with the automatic precision of professionals who had run this drill hundreds of times. Descent initiated. ATC notified. Passenger oxygen confirmed. Crew oxygen donned. Each action confirmed and logged in the time it would take a civilian to understand that something was wrong. They were managing. That was not the problem. The problem was that they did not know why. The pressure warning systems on the 777-200ER are designed to detect, not diagnose. The cockpit instruments told Harmon that cabin pressure was falling at a rate consistent with a partial seal failure, and that the forward door seal monitoring system was showing an anomalous reading. What the instruments could not tell him was whether he was looking at a sensor fault, the most common explanation, the one that ends with a precautionary landing and an embarrassing ground inspection, or a partial seal failure that was progressing but manageable, or the early signature of a catastrophic decompression event in which the door would fail suddenly, completely, and without further warning. Those three scenarios have three different correct responses. Treating a sensor fault as a catastrophic failure costs the airline a diversion, a full ground inspection, and several $1 million. Treating a catastrophic failure as a sensor fault kills everyone on board. Harmon needed more information. His instruments were not giving it to him. When the interphone chimed and Claire's voice came through telling him that a passenger claimed to know the technical cause of what was happening, his first instinct was the instinct of every experienced pilot who has ever heard a similar claim, immediate and professional skepticism. His second instinct, the one that 30 years of flying had built under the first, was to override it. He pressed the door release. Maya stepped into the cockpit. She had been in cockpits before, in her professional capacity, twice with full crew briefings and once during an investigation where she had needed to physically inspect the instrument panel of a grounded aircraft. She had never been in one like this, with the red warning light still on and the Atlantic horizon visible through the forward windows and two pilots watching her with the controlled expression of men who are simultaneously running a complex emergency procedure and deciding in real time whether a stranger is worth listening to. "Who are you?" Captain Harmon said. Not aggressively. Just precisely. The question of someone who needs a specific answer quickly. "My name is Maya Reyes," she said. "I work in aviation systems analysis for a government-contracted safety firm. I've reviewed the maintenance bulletins for this aircraft series. What you're experiencing is consistent with a progressive door seal failure in the forward section, specifically related to a torque calibration error on the door hinge assembly documented in Maintenance Bulletin ARB 7734. The seal has not failed catastrophically. It is failing progressively. The question is how much structural margin you have left and where you can put this aircraft down before that margin runs out." Harmon looked at her for 2 full seconds. Then at his instruments. Then back at her. "How do you know this?" "I felt the vibration pattern change 42 minutes ago," she said. "At 7:49 a.m. and approximately 14 seconds. The oscillation frequency in the forward fuselage section shifted by a margin too small for standard instruments to flag but consistent with a compromised load path in the door assembly. The pressure drop confirmed what the vibration suggested. I've been tracking the rate of change since I felt it." First Officer Watanabe's eyes moved from Maya to his instrument panel and back. "She's describing a pattern consistent with what we're seeing on the door status display. I've been trying to cross-reference against the sensor fault parameters and it's not matching cleanly." Harmon made a decision the way experienced commanders make decisions, not slowly, not dramatically, but with a kind of settled finality. He pointed to the jump seat behind the first officer. "Sit down." Do not touch anything. Tell me everything you know. Maya sat down. She started talking. What followed was 14 minutes that would later be transcribed from the cockpit voice recorder in precise, numbered notation, formatted into an appendix of the official incident report, and reviewed by aviation safety specialists in 4 countries. In those 14 minutes, Maya walked Captain Harmon through the maintenance bulletin, through the physics of the pressure differential at altitude versus the structural tolerance of a hinge assembly operating at 86% of specification, through the specific vibrational signatures that distinguished a progressive failure from a catastrophic one, and through the data points she had been tracking since 7:49 a.m. She described what she knew with precision. She described what she was inferring with equal precision, always flagging the distinction. She did not overclaim. She did not understate. She spoke the way investigators speak when they have done the work and are presenting the findings, and both pilots heard the difference immediately. She also told them something the instruments could not. The vibration pattern I'm detecting through the airframe suggests the failure is concentrated in the upper hinge assembly, she said. Not distributed across the full door perimeter. If that's accurate, and I want to be clear that I cannot physically confirm this without inspection, then the door is not going to fail suddenly. A full perimeter failure propagates all at once. An upper hinge failure propagates progressively, which means you have a window. How wide? Harmon said. Based on the rate of change between when I first felt the shift and where the vibration signature is now, I estimate 40 to 60 minutes of structural margin at current pressure conditions. If you reduce cabin altitude, the differential pressure drops and the failure rate slows. That widens the window. Watanabe was already running the numbers. Closest suitable diversion is Gander International, Newfoundland. 43 minutes at current speed and heading with a descent to 10,000. The 3 of them were quiet for 1 second. 43 minutes, Harmon said. If my estimate is right, Maya said, yes. He turned back to his instruments and keyed the radio with the calm of a man who has made his decision and is now simply executing it. Gander Center, this is Atlas Regional 509, declaring an emergency and requesting immediate priority routing to Gander International. We have a progressive door seal failure and 214 souls on board. Initiating descent to flight level 100. In the cabin, the passengers had settled into the specific kind of stillness that comes after the first shock of an emergency has passed and before the outcome has resolved itself. Most of them had their masks on. Some of them were holding hands with people they had never met before. The flight attendants moved through the rows in pairs, checking each row, speaking in low voices, answering the questions they could answer and calmly redirecting the ones they could not. The child in row 19 had stopped crying. She was 4 years old and her name was Lily, and she had stopped crying because her mother had told her they were going to land on a special airport and that was exciting, and Lily had decided to believe this, which was the correct decision. The businessman in row 7, whose name was Graham and who had not called his wife because he did not know what to say, sat with his phone in his hand and looked out the window at the North Atlantic far below. He was thinking, with the strange clarity that sometimes comes in moments of possible ending, that he had been on this same route 23 times in the last 4 years and had never once noticed the ocean. Outside the windows, the Atlantic was enormous and gray and completely indifferent to what was happening inside the aircraft above it. At 7:56 a.m., with the descent underway and the aircraft passing through 22,000 feet, Captain Harmon handed Maya the secondary radio handset and asked her to relay the technical details of the door failure to the Gander Emergency Coordinator, a former aircraft structures engineer named Lou Peterson who was already on the line and who needed the specific failure parameters to prepare the right ground team. Maya keyed the handset. Gander Coordinator, this is AR-509, I'm a passenger with technical background relaying structural information from the flight deck. We have a progressive seal failure on the forward main cabin door, upper hinge assembly, consistent with torque calibration variance documented in 77 Series Maintenance Bulletin ARB 7734. Estimated seal integrity at 34 to 40% of specification. Rate of degradation has slowed with descent but has not stopped. We will need a door inspection team on standby with 777 door specification access and a complete emergency seal kit. Please confirm receipt. Lou Peterson's voice came back immediately, the voice of a man who had spent 30 years around aircraft and knew exactly what those words meant. AR-509, confirmed. Teams are mobilizing. We'll have full 777 door spec access ready on the apron. Can I get your designation for the log? Maya held the handset for 1 second. Call sign Phoenix, she said. She said it the way pilots say call signs, flat, precise, professional, with no more weight on it than any other piece of information transmitted over a radio. Just 2 words. But something in the cockpit changed when she said them. Captain Harmon turned his head slightly to the left, toward the jump seat, a movement so small it would barely register on the cockpit video recorder. First Officer Watanabe's fingers paused for a fraction of a second above his keyboard before resuming. The Gander coordinator logged it without comment. Nobody asked what it meant. There was no time, and in any case, some things do not need explaining to the people present when they are said. The descent was smooth. At 10,000 feet the pressure differential dropped to a level the compromised seal could manage without further progression, and the vibration signature Maya had been tracking with her feet pressed flat against the cockpit floor showed no acceleration. The structural margin she had estimated was holding. She did not say anything about this. She sat in the jump seat and monitored and reported when Harmon asked her to report and said nothing when he did not. Outside, the coastline of Newfoundland appeared below the cloud layer, gray-green and unfamiliar and the most welcome sight anyone in that cockpit had ever seen. At 8:31 a.m., Flight AR-509 touched down at Gander International Airport on runway 03, 7 minutes inside Maya's worst-case margin, with all 214 passengers and 10 crew members on board, every one of them alive and breathing and in one piece. The landing was smooth. Almost gentle. Harmon greased it, the way pilots sometimes do when they need the landing to say something that words cannot. When the aircraft came to a full stop on the taxiway where the emergency vehicles were waiting, there was a moment of complete silence in the cabin. Then someone started clapping, one person, in the middle of the cabin, who simply could not hold it anymore. Then the row beside them. Then the whole cabin was clapping, the way people clap when they are not celebrating something good so much as they are releasing something terrible that arrived right up to the edge and then did not come through. The flight attendants were crying. The child in row 19 was asleep in her mother's arms. The businessman in row 7 finally called his wife, and when she answered he said her name once and then could not say anything else for a moment. The door was inspected on the ground within 22 minutes of landing. The engineering team confirmed what Maya had described. The upper hinge assembly on the forward main cabin door showed a torque calibration failure consistent with Bulletin ARB 7734, with seal integrity reduced to approximately 34% of rated specification. The structural analysis completed the following day estimated that under cruise altitude pressure conditions, the door would have reached catastrophic failure within 20 to 40 minutes of the time the masks had dropped. The timeline overlapped almost exactly with Maya's estimate. RET Captain James Mercer, reviewing the incident for Atlas Regional's Internal Safety Board, described the outcome as a convergence of professional preparation, crew receptiveness, and a passenger contribution that had no clear precedent in his 30 years of incident review experience. Dr. Rachel Owens, the senior specialist commissioned for the independent technical analysis, wrote that Maya's diagnostic framework had reoriented the crew's response in a way that was measurably decisive, and that without it the available response time would have been consumed by instrument ambiguity rather than targeted action. The official report listed the contributing factors to the safe outcome as crew professionalism, ATC cooperation, and passenger technical advisory. No name was attached to the third item. Maya spent 2 days in Gander. She answered every question the investigators asked. She was cooperative, precise, and thorough, and she signed the non-disclosure agreement about her firm's work without hesitation. On the morning of the third day she picked up her black duffel bag, checked out of the hotel, and boarded a connecting flight to London. She arrived on Wednesday. Her debrief went ahead 2 days late, and she apologized for the delay with a brevity that suggested she considered the explanation obvious. Nobody asked. Word travels in certain circles, and in those circles, some things are known without being said. The official record of Flight AR-509 is 14 pages and 3 appendices. The incident led directly to an accelerated review of maintenance procedures related to ARB 7734. 17 aircraft were identified for immediate corrective action. The report is thorough, precise, and correct in every detail it contains. What it does not contain is a photograph of the woman in seat 4D. It does not contain her real name or her full professional history or the name of the firm she worked for. It does not contain the moment she unbuckled her seatbelt when every other person on the aircraft was reaching for their mask. It does not contain the 14 minutes in the cockpit or the radio call or the 2 words she said when the coordinator asked for her designation. Those things are in the cockpit voice recorder. They are in the logs at Gander Center. But the only place they are truly preserved, the way the most important things are always preserved, not in documents but in the memory of the people who were actually there, is in the minds of Captain David Harmon and First Officer Kenji Watanabe. They flew together 7 more times after that day. They never discussed it directly, not once. But each of them, independently, when asked years later about the most significant flight of their career, named the same one. AR-509. October. The Atlantic. The girl in seat 4D. Call sign Phoenix. In the maintenance archive at Gander International Airport, in a standard gray storage box filed under Incident Reference AR-509-GND, there are 2 items. The first is the door inspection report, stamped and signed and filed in the correct format. The second was found in the seat pocket of 4D during the post-incident cabin sweep. It was not a hazardous material. It was not required for any investigation. The ground crew member who found it placed it in the archive box with a note that said simply, "Passenger item, unclaimed, seat 4D." It is a paper cup. Black coffee. Cold. No name on it. Never claimed.